So yeah, and just a quick format of what we'll be covering. So this came out of a check-in we did a few months ago at this point with folks of just saying, what would you be interested in as Hunger Council members? And a lot of folks said gardening, which is not surprising given that we've seen such a huge spike in food insecurity, and gardening can be a really great way for all different types of community members to help increase food access in their communities. So we're trying out this new model. It's really neat to see so many different hunger councils represented on this call. And it's also great to already start hearing some of the connections that could be made. So we're gonna do, when we heard about all this interest in gardening, it was like, cool, we're gonna talk to the Vermont Community Garden Network because they are the experts on this. So Libby's gonna give an overview of what VCGN is, some of the resources that they offer, and then we'll do kind of a really deep dive into how does food insecurity and gardens, how do they intersect? And Libby will walk through some of the different models of how do we do community gardens. Some of them were discussed today of community farms or shared neighborhood plots. So going through and which different models might make the most sense for all the different ways that we're trying to increase food access. But we want to make sure that folks have plenty of time for questions and resource sharing and things like that as well. So I will start sharing my screen, and as it's hard for me to sometimes see chat and things, now if you have any tech questions, send them to either Libby or I'm also going to put Rima on the spot, but hopefully this goes well.
Yeah, I just want to, as Jenna's pulling that up, I just want to second, I'm really excited about who's in the room, and seems like you all have a lot to offer, and I think we have maybe some collective solutions to figure out, so we'll have time for that in a little bit. So next slide, please. So Vermont Community Garden Network, who are we? Well, I'm going to kind of give a very quick overview, but really my focus is on what resources can you access for your own work? How can we support what you're doing? But in short, we help people access resources to grow food with a special focus on building community and confidence around shared growing spaces. So these community-based gardens that I've mentioned a couple of times. We are the connectors, loose connectors of a network of nearly 600 community-based gardens in the state of Vermont. And we also work with folks across the borders here and there too, as our state has loose borders in that sense. There's some great work happening on both sides. Next slide, please. We do a lot with a tiny staff of real kind of quick sampling of some of our programs. We have a grant program that has a focus on garden projects in underserved communities, and that highlights kind of innovation and creative solutions that we can then shine back to our network. And a lot of the things that I as a network connector, my title is a statewide network coordinator. I'm always, that's a lot of what I do is I have examples that I then can shine back out because you all are your best resources, and you'll see that again and again throughout, as in a little later in the presentation as well. We also have garden education programming that we do for children, families, seniors, adults, with a focused on new American communities and affordable housing communities, people with health risks, and everybody under the sun who might benefit from gardening and the skills building that's related to that. A lot of our current garden education program happens in the Burlington area, but we have started to kind of tiptoe around the state a little bit in terms of actual hands-on programming with affordable housing. We're working with a group called Evernorth and a number of housing companies, agencies across the state. So if you are involved in that kind of work, definitely something we're looking to do more of. So be in touch with us. Garden organizing support is a lot of what I do in my position. And so that's through workshops, networking opportunities, trainings that we do every now and again for people who are involved in sort of leadership roles in community-based gardens. And then our newest program is a collaboration with a program called Vermont Victory Gardens, which is a project, it's a UVM Extension Master Gardener project, and then collaborating with us And the idea is sort of educator matching. So with master gardeners or other people who have food growing knowledge, matching them up with community-based gardens that are food security focused. And so that might mean that that garden grows food, or at least a portion of that garden grows food for people who need it, and that goes into the emergency food system. Or it might mean that there are plots and growing opportunities and education opportunities for people who might otherwise be at risk of food security. So that we are actually still kind of doing some matching between educators and gardens for that program. So definitely I'll mention it a few more times, but another opportunity there. Next slide, please. So beyond our core programs, some other resources that might be relevant to you all. We help garden groups with planning. I do quite a bit of consulting and just kind of someone starting something up and they give me a call, and whether that's just a very informal email or whether I have jumped on Zoom, especially in these days, everyone's getting more comfortable with that, jumped on a video call just with a team to help them figure out what's you're getting started, what do you do next? And so that's a part of what I do, help with that kind of planning piece. I do that also in the farm to school world in a more official capacity through some of the Agency of Ag grant programs and a number of other areas. And then we also work to help people find the funding that they need for that too. And so our grant program does that some of the time. They're small grants though, and we actually don't have them available this year just due to funding limits. But we keep an updated list of garden grants on our website. And I can help you find what you need, because it's a little bit, navigating through that can be a bit much. So that's part of my job too. We also, in addition to funding and figuring out that kind of aspect of things, we get materials like seeds. Sometimes we hear about plants that are available from farms or drip irrigation that someone is giving away, things like that. And then our job is to redistribute those. We have a seed distribution that happens every spring. We have now pretty much gotten all of those seeds out the door. And then kind of ongoing when it arises. I just recently matched up a farmer with from, I think it was the Upper Valley actually area, with some gardens in that area. And then our website resources. That's the next page, actually. Next slide, please. Website resources. So it's a bit of a, there's a lot going on, but the idea on our website is there are resources for the organizer. So we have a garden organizing toolkit. So that's everything from how do you start a community-based garden, how do you organize volunteers, setting up guidelines for your garden, all the things under the sun, community garden organizing. And then we have some things that are a little bit more specific, like a housing specific toolkit, and community composting is something we've done a bit with. We have a bunch of resources around on our website as well. Plethora of resources to inspire and inform. But again, I always encourage people who are checking things out on our website to also be in touch with me if you're looking for something specific, because it can just be take a little while to find what you're looking for. And then for the gardener, we have Growing in the Garden page, which is just kind of all of our favorite resources around growing. And we also at the bottom of our front page of our website, there's a sign up for a weekly newsletter that is available during the season. And so that's a great thing if you have a group of gardeners you're working with and you just want to give them an easy kind of like resource around what should they be paying attention to as the summer goes along. That's a great resource just to kind of keep them connected to that. And then keeping connected, speaking of keeping connected, how do you keep connected to the network? So we have a monthly newsletter that has a lot of these things I'm talking about, a statewide garden directory, which houses those nearly 600 gardens that are out there, and that we're always looking to do a better job of keeping up to date. A calendar that is populated by events that are happening in different parts of the state. And most recently, a network source list of where people get their gardening supplies. And that's kind of a living document, just like all these other things that we, again, just our network told us where they find things, everything from the hardware store that they go to get their supplies, to the pile of newspapers that's out back of such and such store that they do for their mulching. So hopefully a helpful resource as well. And then the last thing I want to mention, just in terms of resources, coming up this summer, our first Vermont garden tour. And it's open houses at community gardens across the state. And we've been asked for, people love visiting each other's gardens, but just true in general for gardeners in my experience, but definitely in the community gardening world, so much to learn just by seeing each other's gardens. And now that we can just be out a little bit more in public and then outside, especially safely, we are opening some open houses happening. So that will be dates, locations, details will be coming out at the end of this month for that, but those will be in July, August, and September. And then the next slide, Jenna, last thing I want to just mention just around kind of my overview here. So then how can you be involved? I think some of you already are heavily involved. You're not looking for any other ways. And some of you might be kind of trying to figure out where to plug in. So there's supporting the movement. Becoming a VCGN member is an option in terms of both kind of contributing to the cause, but also just being more deeply connected. Sharing resources. I mentioned those how-to gardening resources on those web pages, as well as that weekly email to support gardeners in your community. Get on the map. So make sure that your garden or gardens in your community are in our statewide garden directory, and as well as things that are happening in your community on our calendar, because that gets then shared back out to our broad network. Join the discussion. So we have a closed Facebook group where, just what's happening in different parts of the state, or what is this bug that's eating everything in my garden, or what, like those sorts of kind of like both sides of things, both the fun celebration and the like, I need help. Just a support network for people doing this work and gardening in community. Joining the effort, and this is one thing Jenna and I talked a little bit about, is just sort of this tiered thinking of like, okay, so how do I get involved? What can I do? Well, sometimes this thing before is sort of like, I need to start a community garden in my community. Maybe the answer is what's already happening in your community, or that's, I guess, the question is. And so, checking out our directory and connecting with us about what might be happening, how can you get connected to that, and how can you expand upon those efforts. And then in terms of starting something new, even thinking about if there are already gardens happening in your community, is a seed library needed, or a tool library, a tool lending library, resource centers for people doing this kind of work. And then obviously we are also here to help new gardens grow too, and lots of resources around that, and including some trainings that we offer at different points throughout the year. So that was an awful lot, I realized, but that's kind of our big, actually quick overview, believe it or not. And I'll send it back to Jenna in terms of anything you'd like to add, but also just anything anybody else has to add around resources for people who are trying to do this work, whether it's community gardening or just gardening in their community. What other resources are out there that we should all be knowing about, or questions about things I've mentioned?
Like I said, everyone learns and interacts differently. So if you're more comfortable putting your questions on the shared screen, feel free. But also feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions you have now. I'll just say I live up in Burlington. So the idea of tool libraries, which is something our library actually offers, is so wonderful.
So I actually just had this conversation this morning with a coworker because we're working on with these beds that we've just been gifted, but how to find plants, how to ask for plants. We have like no budget. But is there like something reciprocal can we do, like a trade, like we'll take the plants but share some of the produce that comes from the plants with you? Or we did start a seed library in town, or we collaborated with someone else, because we also have another family engagement program, a little free libraries, those little like boxes around town, and someone approached us to see if we could turn one of those. I'm sorry, I had a phone call in my ear. It's way distracting. Multitasking, not a good idea. Anyway, so a seed library is included in one of the little free libraries.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and the families got to design the little free libraries, the boxes themselves. So the one that includes the seed library actually has like a living roof, and
Whoa.
yeah, it's amazing. It's like the most complicated little wooden box ever.
Oh,
But
cool.
it's amazing. So anyway, that's what I'm looking for. It's just ideas that I can take back about who has any suggestions of at this point in the year, what do we even put in these beds right now? Realistically, right? But
So I can jump in just with some real quick ideas, but definitely anybody else is welcome from your own experience. So you're starting to get to the point where there might not be very many free starts out there, but I bet there are still some people who are just like, yeah, we have, especially, I mean, any nursery is trying to get, if they haven't already, they're trying to get their vegetable starts off their shelves. And so they will give them to you happily. There's no convincing needed. And same is true for, like I mentioned, a farmer got a hold of me the other day. So just anybody who has who grows starts, vegetable starts, will be excited to give them to you.
okay.
So yeah, so I would just start asking around with that about that. Definitely for a number of those, it's a little late to plant, but there are, second sowings, things like greens of any kind, almost any kind, especially if you can, get a little bit of shade cloth or something in your garden just to keep it not too sun beaten down hot. Those things you can definitely do another sowing of those sorts of things. I'm trying to think of other things. So, I mean, definitely like, I'm a big fan of fall gardens and, getting your beds in. I mean, you can get your beds in here soon, or I guess you already have your beds. They're located at the garden, right? The community garden.
They're there. They're big wooden boxes standing on their end right now. They have no dirt.
Okay.
They don't.
Gotcha. They just need to be filled. Gotcha. Yeah. So, I mean, once you get around to the fall, you do some second sowings of greens and things, and then garlic in the fall is a great thing. Just having things that people can see pop up. I did carrots this year in my garden, and then I have a 1-year-old and I did not get out to my garden early enough. But there were carrots and garlic growing in my garden. And so there are actually things coming up. So and those are, especially with little ones, those are really fun things to see green for any of us really early in the season. So those are things you can do. There are lots of other things you can plant mid-season. Green beans is something you could plant again in around July. The list goes on, so I would have to kind of access that, but we can put something in the resources that will help you kind of think about that a little bit.
Right. Yeah. Like starting a late bed. It's like,
yeah, exactly. There's plenty of things that you can still do another sowing of.
thanks.
Yeah. Anybody have any other recommendations, both around getting started late, but also just where to find the plants and starts and all that kind of stuff?
Thinking, Linda, I might actually have either you or one of us can do it. Put the call out on the listserv too, because we do have a number of farmers who are on the Hunger Council listserv, and they might be part of those groups looking to get rid of things.
Good point.
Linda, this is Joni. I found that Clearbrook Farm in Shaftesbury has been very generous with us with extra donations of produce. And I'm willing to bet that they may have some extra starts. But the thing is, you need to get soil in the beds first, right?
Yeah.
And with no money to do that.
Well, I mean, we may have a little bit of money, but like,
But I would recommend Clearbrook to try them. Yeah.
Okay.
That's great. And I love your thinking too, Linda, that we may come back to this at some point, that concept of reciprocation. Like anytime you can think about, okay, what could somebody else get out of this too? Like,
right.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And
trade is awesome.
right. And also that you're a part of a gardening community. Don't forget that. So there may be other people who are both, well, two things. One is may have extra things to give you, but also, and then you can say, oh, and we'll give you a little bit of this in return. But also just the gardening knowledge. You're surrounded by people who have been gardening, some of them probably for a very long time.
Yeah.
And we'll have some great, you can look at what they're planting, right? You know, in a couple weeks.
Yeah. And the UVM extension has a bed there as well. So
Oh, that's incredible. Wow. That's great.
yeah,
Awesome.
I'll tap into our friend Megan Harrington and see what.
Perfect. That's great. She's a great resource.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I have a question. I'm curious, Libby, if you are already in touch with anyone in Montpelier. I haven't really explored this part of the food world in Montpelier in terms of gardening other than the Feast Farm. And I'm curious about things like the garden education for seniors, or there are certainly some senior housing areas that have some garden beds. We have some garden beds, and there's some seniors that garden in front of the senior center. And there's things like that. And so I'm curious about the seed distribution or seed library or tool library, or I don't know, all those things.
So there's some amazing stuff happening in the Brattleboro area. Or no, you're Montpelier.
Yeah.
For some reason I got Brattleboro. There are amazing things happening in Montpelier area too. Luckily I have the exact same answer for that. I don't know why I just started to go.
I used to live in Brattleboro, but that was
there you go. That's fine. So there are some amazing things happening. So seniors, there are, oh shoot, I'm just forgetting the name. It's a Living Well property up on the hill near the herbal center.
Oh,
is that popping into your head at all? What that might be?
Is it just Westview Meadows or something? No,
that might be involved in the name, but I'll see if I can pull it up in my head. But they a couple of years ago they started some great gardens in their courtyard there.
Oh, great.
And have done a lot of, and I think they have a little greenhouse growing. I don't know what all is still happening there, but at least a couple of years ago they were really gung-ho about gardening with seniors and doing programming around that. So I can try to find that for you. Cool. So there's that resource, and you're just wondering what, other resources just for gardening in general.
Yeah, I think partly I'm curious about what already exists and who I could connect with. Yeah. And then seeing what we might be able to collaborate in creating.
Yeah.
I don't want to recreate the wheel. I want to understand kind of what's already there and then see how I could connect people to things if they're interested. I don't know how many people would be, but I also don't know how much they know about what's out there. I also want to, siphon people over to the Feast Farm too, but.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, there are several community gardens in Montpelier, and other kind of related gardening projects that are doing some really cool things. And I know that, again, I'm forgetting whether it's Sustainable Montpelier, maybe.
Yep.
I believe, does that sound like the right name? That they were definitely, looking at food growing as one of their kind of the things they were exploring. And I don't know where they are with that right now, but in terms of a resource, they might be good people to talk to. But I can definitely connect you just with some of those gardens, and just as, again, this is the network in that area, and there's some really excellent people that have been doing this for a while and love to share. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Yep.
We're actually going to be profiling one of the gardens, 485 Elm.
Yeah.
You're on too, so that will be a good group, I'm thinking, for you to connect with, Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. And
some
speaking of which,
did come up on the Menti screen as well, Libby. But
great.
You're calling when you want to. If others had questions, you want to jump in now. Like I said, we're trying to build in plenty of time for discussion. So
yeah. So maybe we check out those questions, the Mentimeter questions, and then unless there's anything else burning, then we move on to some of our picture slideshow.
So suggestions for garden signage. And I know actually we're going to be talking about some really good examples of signage, especially for shared community farms and things like that. So hopefully we might cover that. But
so I have I would call myself, I don't know if I'm the only one that exists in the world, but I would call myself a signage nerd. I really I think it's one of the most important things, and I love it. And I did a whole post on garden signage, which is tacked to a picture slideshow. So lots of examples there. So I will include that in our follow-up resources. Yeah, but great question.
And then for gardens that are primarily based for donating, what's the best food to grow for donations? I know in previous conversations we had forget who it was, but someone actually sent a survey in, I believe, the fall or the winter. So after their garden was done, they're starting to plan for next year, to their local food shelf and said, hi, what would you want? What would actually be taken by folks who shop at the food shelf? I don't know if others have had experience with that as well.
I can tell you what's popular at the Listen food shelf. It's tomatoes and cucumbers, peppers, mushrooms. Those are the big things I can think of right now.
The tomatoes, I'm not surprised. The mushrooms, though, that's an interesting one.
I don't know. The mushrooms go pretty fast when we get
I love
there.
it.
People, it's just a luxury item, I guess.
Yeah.
We've noticed onions and greens as well being really important.
Yeah, onions and
herbs.
greens are important, but we do get a lot of onions from other sources. Sometimes potatoes. We do get a lot of potatoes, but it's nice to have a variety of potatoes.
Yeah, I think that it draws right back to Jenna's point that, and I've heard this from every food shelf I've talked to, it's just like, there are some common themes, and it's like, it's going to be different based on what you're getting from elsewhere, what you get tons of from a farmer or a really reliable garden source or gleaning source.
We
So
found
yeah, having that conversation.
fruit is very popular too. Berries of any kind, melons. The thing that doesn't go too well is purple fruit, purple vegetables. For some reason, people are afraid of purple potatoes, purple carrots. You know, even though they taste wonderful, but it's a mindset.
It's something new.
Yeah.
I can get people to take purple potatoes, but other purple things, it's hard.
Yeah.
We at Head Start, we did some taste testing, and we found like orange carrots and purple carrots, and had the kids like served them at snack time, and then sent pictures and recipes home with the kids so they could share with their families that they had eaten purple carrots. So maybe
Great
we
idea.
Work even with the schools, right? Trying to get more of the purple vegetables into the school, and letting families know your kids are actually eating these things.
Which can be hard, and especially if especially a parent, and you're looking at what are my limited financial resources, taking that risk, even though we know we should be exposing kids to different foods. If you don't eat it, are you wasting that money? So that's a really good
Right.
one.
They don't want to have any waste. And I find, and I imagine the same thing happens at the food shelves, but if I'll digress a little bit. As a food resource specialist with some of our families, I've even taken some families grocery shopping, some moms with their WIC, with their WIC list. And I've actually had parents say they don't even bother going to the produce section because they don't themselves know what to do with so much of that produce, that again, they don't want to waste the money. So they don't get it because they don't even know what they're looking for.
That's right.
Garlic is another popular item, and melons, watermelon.
Yeah, I think we need more education somehow down, especially in the southern part of the state. I don't know what's available, but I would love to see more through the food bank or other sources.
You can see Libby and I are both making a lot of notes or things for us to both research and then just send out as well. So yes.
So I have many hats here at the hospital in community health, and one of them is the healthcare shares with, and I'm going to say the name wrong because this is a new position for me since January, but Vermont Youth Corps Conservation Corps. And so I have 30 shares that the hospital purchase of like CSA. And so then we reach out to the community and try to find families who want access to fresh fruits and vegetables. And one of the things that the Youth Corps does is that they send recipes with these, and again, this is new to me, so I'm listening to all the people who helped run it in the past, but they said, like, if they're sending fennel, they're going to send how to use something. And I don't think I think it's a new one recipe a week. So it's not like they're overwhelming people with 5 recipes. And I feel like I used to live in the seacoast of New Hampshire, and similar thing was if you got something from your CSA and they gave you a recipe for that 50 pounds of kale that they include in their CSA, and who knew if you have to beat up kale, like you have to massage it, I guess, and it tastes better when you make kale chips. But anyway, so if there's ways to give a recipe, but then again, a recipe that focuses on the age bracket of like the kids, like, eating it versus an age bracket of people who already are more comfortable in the kitchen. So that's what I'm working with as one of my many hats of food insecurity. So.
Awesome.
And then someone
Thanks
was
for sharing.
asking, how do you start a seed library?
So that is definitely a great question, more involved. So that will be another resource I can tack on to our follow-up. There are a number of people who have done that in the state of Vermont. Linda, I don't know if you were involved in starting your mini seed library. If you want to say, we have just a tiny bit of time, but if you want to share anything, a few quick tips.
I wish I had.
Okay.
I was not. I'm working on books right now for
Gotcha.
the little free library, but I know that one of them is the seed library, and it's a partnership, and I really don't know how, and also how they're advertising it, right? Like how do people even know, once you get it started, how does anyone know it exists? How do you get it to get going? I don't know. Great question.
Yeah. So I'm happy. We'll put. There are some websites that do some organizations that do a really nice job of kind of laying out those resources. But also I can connect you to other groups in Vermont who've done that, because there's some really great examples out there.
I think there is one in Southern. There is somebody who does like a seed library or a seed exchange in Stamford.
Oh yeah, Stanford, Vermont. That's Stanford, Vermont Seed Savers.
Stephen Green is the
Stephen Green and Helen Fields. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So I know of them. I don't know anyone else. I mean, you couldn't get much further south in Vermont. Anyway, I'm sure they'd be. They may even be able to connect someone to other resources through the state as well. So
Joni and I had the same idea.
I believe Bennington College has a seed library too that's available to the public. Yeah.
Yep.
I connected with the Upper Valley Seed Savers this year and had my food pantry customers order from them. So the Seed Savers were able to mail them seeds for their gardens.
Oh, how cool.
Yeah. So last year I got seeds from Willing Hands. They gave me all of their old seeds and I gave them out here at the food pantry. People were excited to garden at home, but I don't know how any of them did. I never really got any feedback. So I'm hoping that they had some great gardens.
Awesome. That's a great connection.
This makes me so happy. All right, so we're going to move on, just knowing there is other time for asking questions, but wanted to quickly give some grounding for this conversation, just knowing that there's so much to talk about with gardening, but why is there such an interest of it peaking in the last year? And as most of us know, a large part of that is just folks looking to be able to grow their own food or make more food accessible to their local communities. So I'll go back with a quick history in terms of where we are in terms of the status of hunger in the state. So one thing that Hunger Free Vermont is paying a lot of attention to is what happened after the last financial crisis. So looking back at the Great Recession, which started in 2008, and we saw hunger peaked a few years later, actually after that start. And so that's something that we're keeping in mind as the state is starting to recover, as the nation is starting to recover. we know that people are going to continue to struggle. So it's really important that we continue to provide resources through gardens, through programs like WIC or school meals. There's so much that we need to be able to do to strengthen our communities. So after hunger peaked, after the Great Recession in 2013 is where we saw the highest. Hunger has been on a slow but steady decline. Before the pandemic, we were at 1 in 10 Vermonters were experiencing hunger, which is still far too many folks. But once the pandemic hit and all the economic uncertainty and challenges that people faced, we saw a very dramatic spike. You can see here, February to May, huge spike in hunger. At one point, 1 in 3 Vermonters were experiencing hunger. That might have been from the start of pandemic to now. It might have been someone dipped in and out. But as we're looking, especially through this conversation about how do we increase food access through community-based gardens, it's really important to see, even if someone's been able to kind of regain some source of stability, a lot of folks have had to exhaust their savings. A lot of folks also, there's been a lot of trauma. And so how are we taking into consideration making these gardens accessible or making the food that we're donating accessible? What are the limited resources that people have? So the ideas of seed gardens and tool libraries that we've been talking about is really important because tools are expensive. So as we're looking to increase access, what are some of the challenges that people face? And something that's come up in a lot of conversations is also just how do we make the programs that we're running relevant for folks? There are so many priorities that people are juggling. How do we make sure that these gardens are meeting people's needs? And so that's part of what Libby's going to cover too, is just what are different forms that gardens can take to try to best fit with what we're working on. And I know, Jill, that was something I think you were saying for the WIC families of like, how do we make these gardens relevant for those people in a way that's accessible to them too? So we will start into different forms of community gardens, but Libby wanted to also, we've used that term a lot, community-based gardens. What does that mean?
Great, thanks, Jenna. So a little bit of grounding. So what is it? Community-based garden, based on just kind of our internal definition at VCGN, a shared food-based growing space can take place in a lot of different places, within kind of embedded in neighborhoods, at parks, schools have been mentioned, workplace gardens is another thing we see, affordable housing, libraries, hospitals, early care centers, all of these places, gardens are popping up, and people are managing and growing in them in all the different kinds of ways, meeting different needs of those kind of unique cultures in each of those spots as well. But what do they have in common? So they all provide some kind of community space where there wouldn't have been otherwise. A patch of green and things that are growing and in some capacity that wasn't there before, and they do increase food access in some way, shape, or form. I do want to and I just say kind of in this context too that so we got some questions about how do you run a community-based garden, how are they tended, who runs them, all those sorts of questions. Really great questions. The answer is it's all over the board, a lot of different models out there for making that happen. And that's what we're going to get into in just a second. Whether you're new to this world of community-based gardens or you're kind of just diving in, I hope that this next section will kind of give you that context as well as maybe some new inspiration for your work. A brief caveat is that I am telling, you'll see, I'm telling other people's stories in this next section, and I will do my best to represent accurately. I think I got it pretty much. But if you are involved in or know of any of these gardens that I'll be talking about, feel free to chime in. You can even, we're a small enough group, you can even interrupt me, or we can talk about it when I'm done. Whether you have something that needs to be corrected, or just I would love to hear updates or anything like that to some of these projects as well. So I think before I dive into that, Jenna did have one thing for you all, a quick survey, I believe.
So overview of the different types of community-based gardens that people, we just wanted to get a sense of, have you heard of any of these? Are you involved with them? So another little quick survey.
Wow, that is the first time that every single box has been had a somebody who knows about it. That's great. Excellent. All right. So starting with just plot-based community gardens, probably the most well-known model. Allotment gardens is another way that some people talk about that. They offer a space to grow for people who might not otherwise have that space. So whether it's apartment dwellers or just people who don't have a space for certain crops and they want to kind of grow in larger spaces. That's the gardening space is divided into various size plots based on the gardening needs or desires. So that's one thing that's nice about this model. If there's a variety of needs, can get at that. There's some kind of plot rental or sign up of some kind is focused on individual work. So people actually have an individual bed for themselves or their family. There's often some component of communal upkeep of communal spaces or borders or whatever that happens to be. And then these are managed typically by volunteers or some kind of institutional entity. So this first picture here is one of the 14 Burlington area community gardens in Burlington, and it's called Tommy Thompson Community Garden. It's definitely the largest garden. I've been to gardens in different parts of the country. It's actually the largest garden I think I've ever been to. It is large, diverse in every way, shape, and form. And if you're ever just looking for like every kind of growing style you can think of, just go take a tour of Tommy Thompson Garden and you will get inspired. And so they really get at that diverse needs kind of piece of things. They are managed by the Parks and Rec Department in Burlington, but they each garden is coordinated, kind of the on the ground work, coordinating with kind of supporting gardeners, that kind of thing, by volunteer coordinators. One of which is Jenna, actually. And they have a variety of plots. So they have a few kitchen plots, as they call them, under 90 square feet, half plots, 250 to 350 square feet, and then full plots at around 750, and ranging from $25 to $75 to rent one for the season. And then they have scholarships as well for that particular plot. So that's sort of, I would say that's your most typical when we talk community gardens of what people think of. Next slide, please. Another kind of a plot-based garden, but a slightly different model. This is Hickory Street Resident Gardens in Rutland. And they, for kind of smaller communities like this, or smaller spaces like this, oftentimes raised beds are utilized. And so they're getting sort of, their diversity here is less about size, more at like 24 to 32 square feet, less about size and more about height. So thinking about accessibility by, the beds on legs in the back there for people who need to stand or use a walker or that kind of thing while gardening. The ones that had the sitting edge for people who are best to be sitting while gardening, a little lower ones for maybe if you're those of us who either prefer to kneel or involving kids in our gardening, that kind of thing. So, still really thinking about that accessibility piece, but just in a slightly different way. Their plots are all free for residents. That's a part of kind of what they're getting at. And they do a lot of, I think, education around kind of maximizing that space, which you can through things like square foot gardening as a technique for a lot of times people use in those kind of smaller growing spaces. Next slide, please. So moving on to the kind of the next model, collective gardens is one term for these. Community farms is sort of another version of that. And the idea here is you grow a variety of vegetables in one large space. They're communally tended. The participants take home a share of that produce in some way, shape, or form. And they're typically able to produce more than individual plots with less individual input time, effort, that sort of thing. So definitely something to note if you're looking into that model. There's definitely a need for collective spirit. Obviously, you're doing stuff together. You got to be willing to do stuff together and be coordinated, and a higher level of overall coordination from my experience. Just that it takes a little bit more. One of my favorite examples is the garden at 485 Elm in Montpelier that Jenna referenced earlier. They is actually a couple in Montpelier, residents, They had a big side yard and beautiful, rich soil. Anyways, they just wanted the community to use their yard. And so they sent it out to Front Porch Forum. Hey, community, what do you want to do with our yard? And they said, garden. And so they put together this collective garden, really cool space. And they, it's located right there next to their house. People, you rent a plot, just kind of like you rent your time, I guess I should say. You do contribute a little bit to be a part of the garden. It's a small fee for the season. There's a scholarship for their program as well. You put in 2 to 4 hours a week, a mixture of sort of work parties and solo work. I think a lot of people put in more than that because they just love it there. It's a real community kind of feel. Next slide, please. Fresh Start Community Farm is one I think a lot of people in this network have perhaps heard about. So they're located up in Newport area. I think they have 2 gardens now, but it's kind of fluctuated over the years, different numbers, but on a mixture of community and private and public spaces kind of throughout their community. This one right here, Summer Street Garden, is sort of nestled right in the middle of a neighborhood. And I just love this garden because it's in our very rural state. It's one of the most urban gardens I feel like we have, even more than a lot of our Burlington gardens, because it is right, there's a house here, house here, and senior center back here. And it's totally nestled in, and the community really uses it. And their model is, so they're tended by a core team of volunteers. So there's sort of a core group of people who makes it all happen, and then community members kind of engage in what ways that they can and what time allows. And I think sometimes, I don't know, it might be more formal now, but at one point it was fairly informal. It's like, hey, come and do a couple of hours and go home with some produce. So the amount of time you put in kind of equates to a certain amount of produce. This picture up in the left hand corner is people were interested in salsa making, so they made salsa together. It's just sort of like a neighborhood feel to it. There's some playground equipment on there that, so kids can use it. Just a really cool space. The next slide, please. So Susu Community Farm is a community farm, from my understanding, which is still in development, but I believe that they're trying some things out this season, maybe in collaboration with another garden in the Brattleboro area. It's a Black and Indigenous stewarded farm and land-based healing center, and their vision, and I think they've started to offer CSAs and growing opportunities for BIPOC families in the area, which really allows them, with this model, allows them to address the unique needs of a very specific community who might otherwise be underserved. And a really cool model. I'm excited to hear more about how it goes and how it's going. There's a similarly inspired urban farm where I live right now in Winooski called Conscious Homestead as well. Next slide, please. So educational or teaching gardens, a space for exploration and learning, of course, really used mostly for teaching, less so for production. So we're talking about, this is the main thing they're doing, is they're trying to educate and typically work best if they're connected to a program or an institution, just because of the coordination involved in this sort of project. But Thetford Elementary School, just talking about elementary schools that are doing good work, there are loads of school gardens out there. This is one of the ones that's doing a great job, connected to the classroom and the cafeteria. They have sort of the gardens connected to class projects, but also vertical learning themes across the grades. Like the kindergartners are the garden explorers, you have the pollinator protectors, the soil stewards, seed stewards. It's kind of a cool way to kind of keep kids connected, keep the students connected throughout their time at Thetford. Next slide, please. The community teaching garden, and a different sort of model, an adult intensive beginner organic gardening course, and it's located in the Burlington area. It's managed by VCGen staff and interns, and it's kind of an intensive situation. So it's located within a community garden, basically a community garden area. You get your own plot, and like a community garden, and then you tend it throughout the season. But you have instruction throughout. So you have, I think it's right now it's once a week, but one to two times a week, you get instruction throughout more than 22 weeks, kind of for the full growing season is the idea. Workshops, but also just guidance and that kind of thing. So a nice kind of practical way to get people gardening. Next slide, please. Gardening for Health is one of our newer programs that's located at a hospital. And it's in coordination with UVM Medical Center. And it's an adult garden and nutrition education workshops, kind of a workshop series that people can go through and do some growing and take some things home and learn some of those skills, and specifically for qualifying patients. And I believe right now the focus group is people who are at risk of diabetes. So again, a great way to kind of connect to a very specific population and provide special resources for them. Next slide, please.
Just thinking that your colleague Walter Zisky was actually on our last conversation and got really excited about bringing this model to Giffords in some form. So we're already exploring that.
Yeah, thanks, Joan. Next slide, please. Thank you. So donation or giving gardens. I imagine a number of you in your work are familiar with this concept and model. So growing produce that's useful for the charitable food system. They're almost always communally tended. They're kind of a version of collective gardens, but the food is going elsewhere. And they are, being connected to, obviously, to having a good connection with the charitable food system, like we were talking about before. Like it's a partnership, a true partnership, I think is important in these situations. And that they really have to be mission driven to survive and drive and get up and going. One model that I really love is Change the World Kids Food Justice Gardens and Root Cellar. They do a lot of stuff, Change the World Kids, but the little bits that I know about are they have 4 gardens in the Woodstock area, and from what I hear, they might be expanding beyond Woodstock. They're playing around with that idea, I think, as well as a root cellar at their local elementary school, which is so cool. They build it themselves, I think with some help, but they super cool project, and it's entirely managed by high school students. I mean, they do the whole thing, and part of the idea with the root cellar and the growing is that they are able to extend their offerings to the food shelves and meal programs that they're connected with as well. I believe we just heard from Willing Hands, from Brian at Willing Hands, that they actually also freeze soups, make soups and freeze them, so they have things even later in the season for people in their community. Next slide, please. So Vermont Victory Gardens, I've already mentioned, so I won't go too deeply into this, but one of my favorite gardens from last season that was a part of this project was the Mad River Valley Victory Garden. And in addition, it was located in Waitsfield. And in addition to their garden that grew for the food shelf, they had this Give What You Can farm stand. And they would have produce from their garden there. They would have some prepared foods, recipes like you were talking about with the food shelf and the Head Start program, tastings, all kinds of things, and just a fun way to really connect with community members. And again, like what we're always looking to do is bring dignity to these spaces and this work too. So it's just one of my favorite projects as a part of that. And similarly, local need for fresh produce and mission driven are 2 important pieces. So something that it seems like some people had heard about this concept, but is less common, but people are starting to talk more about, is this idea of help yourself gardens or edible landscaping. So these are based in public or publicly visible locations. That's an important component. It doesn't really work otherwise. They're attended by a team of volunteers. Again, there needs to be some kind of coordination to keep them going. If there's not, it kind of falls apart. And the idea is that it's produce for anyone, so that it's coordinated by this group, that then anyone can harvest it. Obviously, there's a lot of this is based around this idea of awareness raising. So some of it is getting good fresh food into people's mouths and bellies, and but there's an awful lot of it is just helping people be aware of where the food comes from and connecting to that. So one group that's doing a really wonderful job of this, and I've seen a lot of these types of gardens out there that have honestly not been successful. I think Edible Brattleboro is doing a really wonderful job and really playing around with the model. If this doesn't work, what do we do next? And one of the things they do nicely is they have nice signage at all of their gardens. So their mantra sort of is grow food everywhere for everyone. And they have sites at the co-op. They at some nonprofits right there, kind of in their downtown area, fruit trees at schools, and then signage to kind of instruct, okay, it's ready for harvesting. How do you harvest? What is this that I'm harvesting? And I know that they do, in coordination with the co-op too, I think that they do some food tastings and things like that. But a great way to kind of just bring awareness and connection to your community around growing. And then the other side of this is edible landscaping. So this is at the Upper Valley Haven in White River Junction, and they are a temporary housing and community services center. They have housing, but also a food shelf there on site and other community services. They all across the property. It's actually a team of master gardeners that are managing it. I think with some other volunteers as well. And they have, this is an herb garden you see along one of the walkways in front of the housing. There are fruit trees behind them. There are tomato beds along some of the housing pieces. Vining, berries and other things like that that are across archways. It's gorgeous. It creates this beautiful landscape and a place that for a lot of people just like they're needing that beauty in their lives. And they have this little addition that I just love. Sometime a couple of years ago, they have a bus stop right in front of their garden, and they put in this UV Haven bus stop garden. So they have a little planter, and then they grow things, the kinds of things that you can easily take and go. So like cherry tomatoes is what I see right there in the picture. I think there's some herbs maybe in the front of that picture. So things that are just like, yeah, easy to grab and go. Again, that education, but also kind of a fresh snack when you're maybe in a place that you're not feeling so fresh, not feeling so great about life, that it's kind of like a little special gift right there by the bus stop. I thought that was a cool concept. And then the last model I want to mention, which has question marks on it for a reason, but I would love to, someone said that they have been familiar with this idea, so I would love to hear from you when we have a moment. So the concept here is that these are gardens that are located throughout a neighborhood at people's houses. And they're tended, usually communally by teams. But basically the idea is like you kind of ask a neighborhood and neighbors within that neighborhood, are you willing to give us a portion of your yard? Usually kind of the front yard or something like that, to grow food for, whether it's for the charitable food system or for a different effort. And then these teams kind of come and go. I have not seen a truly successful version of this yet, but I think it's a cool idea, and I would like to see a successful version of it. I know that Brattleboro Mutual Aid was playing around with the idea, but I'm not sure where they are with it. So if anybody knows more about that, for sure, I would love to hear it. And this is I think a useful model if you're lacking a larger parcel of land. It's a great neighborhood engagement tool if you're wanting to really get people, landowners, connected to this kind of work. Being able to manage smaller parcels with smaller teams, all of that. So those are the models I wanted to mention. I do have just a couple more slides, just to kind of a tag on here at the end. So truth be told, is most gardens that are out there are a lot of different things. They kind of fit into a number of different categories, but these overarching themes I think are helpful. But for example, Burlington Area Community Gardens, that Tommy Thompson garden I mentioned, they have help yourself berries and fruit trees bordered around their garden. They have educational workshops for their gardeners that they offer throughout the season. Actually, like I mentioned, one of our teaching gardens is located right in the middle of that. So they play around with that hybrid. There's actually the section that has the big field of corn there. There are some specialty crops that are grown by some New American communities. I think it's a little bit more of a collective garden right there that are grown by multiple families. So one thing to note. And then the garden at 45 Elm, they provide a lot of educational workshops for their broader community. They have a great community composting system there that they bring people in to learn about. They have gleaners come to glean food from their garden in addition to giving it to their gardeners. Next slide, please. my last slide. And then 2 gardens I haven't mentioned, but I just think that they're doing a lot of different things. And I think I like how creative they are. So Folsom Community School Garden is obviously educational. It's located at a school and the cafeteria connects to it. But they also donate to summer meal programs, to the local food shelf. They have help yourself snacking beds right there around the schoolyard. They also engage the broader community by local volunteers and partner organizations adopting beds over the summer at different points in time. They've done that. And then Highgate Housing is the last one I'll mention. I think, again, a garden that probably people involved in this work have heard about before, but a model that they have used in the past is they're kind of both plot and collective gardens. So residents, the idea there is that a resident can show their sort of commitment through the collective gardens that they have, and then once they've shown that commitment and feel like, okay, you are ready to be a part of our garden community, they can get their own plot for gardening. They have an excellent garden education program, Good Food, Good Medicine, there that provides year-round programming for adults and children. They have shared meals. They're doing it all, but a really kind of inspiring kind of multi-model garden project out there. So once again, I've thrown a lot at you, but I'm hoping that it was more than just overwhelming, that it actually will be some food for thought and generate some ideas. And wow, we had such a great robust conversation earlier that we are only have a little bit of time for conversation now. But what questions do people have? In what ways did this sort of like, for the things that you're looking to do that you talked about early in our conversation, does this prompt kind of next steps for you, or additional questions? Have at it.
There's something that's striking me, which is one of the sort of auxiliary programs at the senior center in Montpelier. It's new, like brand new, and we're calling it MSAC at Home, is based on the village model of providing seniors with multi-generational support at their homes. And I'm going to talk to my colleague who's kind of running that effort about the curiosity of some of these things, like the network neighborhood gardens and some of those things where, or maybe there's like a tool sharing kind of thing, or it just seems like there'd be a lot of possibility through that program. So I'm very excited about that.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that seems like a obvious connection. Let me know how it goes. Love it. Any other questions or kind of aha moments in the midst of all of that? Or questions for each other too, if you feel like you have something that hasn't been answered yet in our time together.
I'm wondering about engagement. So like right now, our community garden on the campus, it's struggling a little bit only because those of us that are involved in the gardening have other full-time jobs and gardens of our own. So I'm wondering how people are finding the time or getting other members of the community involved in that effort.
I would love to hear what other people have to say, and then I'm happy to chime in. Does anybody who's been involved with this sort of work have any tips for Katrina on engagement?
It's hard, Mary, because you're just coming into the positions. I don't want to put you on the spot, just knowing how long the gardens have been going at NBRH. I wonder if you've heard of like, what does recruitment look like, or is it the same people year after year?
I've learned a lot quickly about gardens or community gardens. Again, as I said, I think it's 1974 they've had these gardens. I don't know if they started with 4, but we're 28 of them. When I got here, there was already a wait list for this year. So it seems like they always, and I ended up going through my wait list 3 times because there was just so much movement. Like when I thought it was settled and said, oh, sorry, we're full, and started taking names, then all of a sudden things switched again, like all of a sudden, so, oh, I don't have enough time as I thought I did. Or I would say 2/3 of our gardeners are repeat. I would say 1/3 of our gardeners literally keep, like they plant perennials, things that come up, year after year, and they're prepared for them. Right now, I'd say, I think ours was 100% word of mouth, but we are on the Vermont Community Garden Network. So I don't know if people find us that way. I don't know if there's a way to say, oh, look, 10 people looked at your little dot, your little star on the map. And then, like, so I don't know how much I don't know, like, so I don't know where they all came from, but it seems like word of mouth. Like I did do one through our staff, just saying, hey, I have, at one point I have 2 or 3 gardens left. And then quickly some staff came through. So I want to say probably a quarter of the people out there are somehow work in one of, somewhere in NVRH, whether it's one of the private practices in town or, so I think it's longevity. So if you don't have anyone yet, in your gardens, I think people are just clamoring when they hear they can have, garden space. I even have someone who has a garden at home, and in Libby's discussion, she mentioned sometimes people come, like one gal said she just didn't have room for potatoes at her house anymore. So her garden here at the hospital is 100% potatoes, which I was like, oh, I didn't think like that avenue. And then I had 2 people who, brand new gardeners who thought, oh my gosh, it might be too big. Because I think our plots are like 28 by 30 or 40. And so I connected those 2 gardeners together and said, why don't you 2 meet and split a garden this year and see how you like it? And I'm happy to put you on top of the wait list for next year to get your own. Like, I'm like, for me, what I've been taking notes on, and I'm going to ask my supervisor, have they ever had, like, again, I was like, we have these land, can I, make 2 more plots because there's more land to the right of our gardens? Can I get volunteers to run those 2 plots if I get them made? Does our food shelf need something? So I was writing down what type of vegetables people like. So I was trying to figure out, I don't want to take any of our space away from people who want it, but how could we, or if I ever had no wait list, but empty gardens, how do I get volunteers to maybe, or convince the 28 people out there, hey, can you guys, if I get you the seeds from the Athenaeum, so I found out our Athenaeum has a seed library, and we usually have a seed swap. Oh, that's another thing, seed swaps, which I didn't run this year because we couldn't because of COVID. Like I'm writing notes like, oh, can I get my 28 volunteers if I supply everything? Can they, or through their seeds, like tell them ahead of time, hey, what if we do these 2 who would like to help? So that's how I've been approaching today's meeting, is so I'm gonna go back to institutional history and find out from my boss, have they done it, what they do? Because, they might have already tried that 10 times. And,
I think a couple of things you said, Mary, really resounded in terms of Katrina's question too, just that like, just talking to people about what they're willing to do, what their needs are. Like, I think anytime I feel like a garden is struggling in terms of engagement, which gardens don't feel like it's like a big, like gardens that's always a thing. You always have to figure it out. Okay, like what's happening. I usually ask people to sort of take a step back and just be like, okay, what are we doing and why are we doing it? Who wants to be involved and why do they want to be involved? And then use that as your driving force for the way that you're setting things up. So remind me, Katrina, who your population is who's involved in your garden.
So we're farm to school, so we
That's
are
right.
early learning center. But something just came to mind. I thought,
Yeah.
Because we're new, and I'm new to this position myself. I've only been at Winston Pratty for 7 months. But right now it's the farm to school committee that's doing it. So we just, by we, I mean me and my, coworker, started all the seeds, planted, and then as a group we kind of planted them in the ground in the early learning center, and the kids have been going out there and tending to the plants. But I'm thinking of that getting family involvement, saying who wants a plot, so they could tend in the garden and then take produce home. Or I think if we had more family involvement and that way, I think it would make a huge difference.
I think now is a great, I mean, anytime that's a great idea, but I think now is a great time to harness that, because as Mary said, waiting lists, all community gardens have waiting lists right now. So school gardens are a great place to be connecting family to places to grow.
Yeah, and I don't know why I didn't think that. I didn't think of that avenue until Mary was saying it, but I'm like,
Yeah.
there might be families who want,
Yeah.
who want their own like spot.
And
Absolutely.
back at our elementary school years ago, they used the word family loosely. It could be awesome. They were a school member was talking to their neighbor, and oh, I wish I had. So somehow through the spider web, they knew somebody at the elementary school, and so then they're still part of the community. Like I don't know if they ever took anyone. Somehow everybody was a neighbor, a relative, but maybe that relative didn't have kids in the school, but they had high school now. So at that elementary one, it was, yeah, they always had a wait list.
And we have so many programs here. We have, the housing program, we have children's integrated services. So really anybody in the community is our family.
Yeah, right. And you have, in terms of your connection to the community, this can be yet another resource for that community.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. What a great connection, Katrina.
Yeah, thank you. That was so helpful.
Oh, good. And I'll just say, just true for any project, just thinking about so even when we are beginning to kind of reach out and find more people and make those connections, just thinking about okay, so how do we, and this is sort of this is for the next workshop that you might attend of Vermont Community Garden Network. How are you going to kind of share that responsibility? And so a lot of times I have people think about who is it on your team? How can you split up those roles? So rather than the 2 or 3 of you doing all of the garden work, maybe one of you is really good at reaching out to people, and then another one is really great at making sure that all those people who are taking some time in the garden are well coordinated and communicated with. So kind of stepping back and thinking about who can play those roles too is, I think, a really important piece.
And I just put in the chat, so I recognize I'm more than happy to continue this as long as folks want.
Yes.
But just recognizing some people want to connect with Libby. So we'll send it with the notes, but Libby, I also just put your email address in the chat as well. Sorry, I cut you off, Mary.
Oh, that's okay. And Katrina, don't forget that high schoolers need community service hours, and kids for college or kids on honor society, they are desperate for new ways to do community service in their communities. So.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great idea too.
So we could talk forever, but it is noon, and actually a little past. So again, there's my email. Please stay connected or get connected if you haven't been connected with us yet. And we do have lots of workshops and other opportunities that get at kind of some of the nitty-gritty of some of these things. So, and then I also just am a phone call or email away, and always happy to brainstorm. That's part of my job. So great. Thank you all for coming. And I know that Jenna might have a few closing words, or any closing words.
No, this was wonderful. Thank you so much. So we'll be following up with the recording. As you saw, Libby and I were making lots of note of some of the resources that were discussed today, and we'll also share some that came up in other conversations. So thank you. It was really lovely to see all of you this morning.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care.